What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today we are tackling a fun, interesting, messy topic, and that's the question of whether therapists are full of themselves. Or another way of framing it is, are therapists narcissists? I've always wondered about this question myself. I have many reasons for wondering about it, of which I will explain a little more later in this video, but I haven't yet found any hard data answering this question for me. If there is hard data available, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to learn about that. But for today's video, I thought I would just share some of my own perspectives, opinions, musings on the topic, and I'm also going to do an informal self-assessment for narcissism to see if I carry this trait of narcissism myself, which that should be very interesting. And I'm going to share those results with you as well. So if you're interested in watching that video, then stay tuned. Welcome to Private Practice Skills. I'm Dr. Marie Fang, psychologist in private practice. I post videos offering tools I learned the hard way about starting and growing private practice so that you don't have to. And I also really like delving into topics that I feel like are important for therapists to delve into, but are not often talked about. Or at least if they are, I'm not finding it out there. So I'm going to talk about it today. Let's ask, are therapists full of themselves? And we'll start by asking whether I'm full of myself. Oh dear, here we go. Okay, so before we can dive into the question of whether therapists are full of themselves, we really need to kind of define the terms of what we're talking about. So for today's video, I'm going to refer to the term narcissism in a loose, informal way. I'm not referring to a formal diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, but it is very much possible to have narcissistic traits without meeting criteria for personality disorder. Though it is also possible to meet those criteria for the personality disorder, but we're not going to get into that in today's video. In my therapy practice, I work with a lot of folks who are adult children of a narcissistic parent, and in that practice, I found Dr. Craig Malkin's work on narcissism incredibly helpful. He has a book called Rethinking Narcissism, and he explains narcissism as living on a spectrum. So rather than it being either you're a narcissist or you're not a narcissist, there's a spectrum of narcissism at one extreme and egoism at the other extreme. Everybody is somewhere on this spectrum. If you're too far to one extreme or the other, then it's problematic, and the closer you can be to somewhere in the middle, then it's much healthier. Dr. Malkin even has a YouTube channel as well where he goes into a deep dive on the topic of narcissism, so I've linked to his YouTube channel below if you're interested in learning more about his way of framing narcissism. I think narcissism tends to be presented in just one way, and I bet when I use the word narcissism, you're conjuring up an image that looks similar to what's typically presented in the media when people use that word. It's that person who's absolutely self-inflated. They're so full of themselves. They think people should worship the ground that they walk on, and they're just constantly seeking approval and needing to just be the best, look the best, etc. Though that's absolutely one presentation of narcissism and a particularly blatant presentation of narcissism, there are a lot of forms of narcissism that are not so blatant. In fact, the term covert narcissism is a real term, and from my experience, covert narcissism is far more common than that more overt narcissism, because overt narcissism is not a cute look on anybody, so people kind of find more covert ways to be narcissists. One presentation of this more covert narcissism is when somebody at face value on paper looks like an incredibly helpful, kind, selfless individual, but they're doing so from a narcissistic motivation. Now, I know the concept of this tends to be a little bit confusing and nuanced, so an example of what I mean by this is, let's say I'm driving down the street, I see somebody is pulled over on the side of the road, it looks like they're having some car trouble, and I decide to pull over to help them. Now, if I'm doing so from a genuine act of kindness mindset, then I'm pulling over because I see someone in distress, and either I'm feeling a sense of compassion that's pulling me towards helping them, or maybe I just have a value set where I want to do kind things when possible, and so I'm just doing a behavior that aligns with that value. But if I'm pulling over from more of a narcissistic motivation to help this person, rather than seeing that person and trying to help their need, I am seeing an opportunity to do something kind in a way that makes me look good as a person. So it's, I want to look good for the other people who are driving by saying, oh, look at that girl Marie, she's helping that person. Or maybe I'm going to tell my friends and family about it later. Like earlier today, I got to pull over and help this person on the side of the road. Or maybe I'm going to post about it on social media. Or even if I don't tell anybody else about it, for me, just internally, I'm doing it so I can tell myself that I am a good person. That is a more narcissistic motivation. So as you can see, it's incredibly nuanced, because if we had a video camera filming each of these scenarios side by side, they might look exactly the same. But the motivation for why someone is helping is very different when they're coming from a more narcissistic perspective than when they're coming from a genuine, compassionate, helpful perspective. The main difference is that between these two scenarios, the narcissistic person is lacking a sense of empathy for the other person and is just focused on themselves and their image. And in the scenario where you're not having the narcissistic motivation, you have a sense of empathy for the other person and you're trying to genuinely help them. So bringing it back to this whole conversation about whether therapists are full of themselves, I imagine that for most therapists who are more narcissistic, they likely have this more covert presentation where they're looking like an incredibly selfless, helpful person, but they're doing so from a narcissistic motivation. They're trying to feed their ego and this persona of being a helpful, selfless person, when they're maybe not. Now, someone could make an argument that if on paper things end up looking the same because ultimately you're helping people, whether it's for your own selfish motivation or if it's because you actually care about that person, then maybe why does it even matter? Why is this problematic to be more narcissistic as a therapist if you're still trying to help people ultimately? One, with a narcissistic therapist, sometimes clients will have this statement of like, I know they're kind of doing all the right things, but I'm just not so sure that they actually care about me. And so that's enough to derail the entire treatment process. Or, and I would argue, much more dangerous and much more worse than that is anytime a client has any type of feedback for the therapist, if they feel like therapy is not really helpful to them or they're wanting to tweak the therapy in some way, a selfless, caring therapist will be humble about it and say, oh, tell me more about that. What's going on? What is it that you're hoping to change? Because I genuinely care about you. So if we need to change something to help you, let's do it. I'm on board. The narcissistic therapist is far more likely to be defensive and potentially be in complete denial about that feedback, because if they believe that they are all that, then this client is now complaining about something that's inaccurate. Like, this client doesn't know how good they have it, or this client is denying treatment, or I've heard all kinds of things. We don't need to name it all, but it's very possible for the therapist to basically say, it's not my fault, it's your fault. And that becomes incredibly toxic. This is the environment where gaslighting can start to happen, to say, well, okay, you're giving me feedback, well, I'm gonna give you feedback about what you're doing wrong, because the narcissist cannot tolerate anything that sounds like I'm not being as helpful as possible. All this to say, I have no idea what percentage of therapists live at that more extreme end of narcissistic traits, but I can say that throughout my years of training and beyond, I've interacted with a lot of supervisors and therapists in position of power who very much were narcissistic in their character, and some of them probably did meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. And so that left me wondering, if I'm seeing all these folks from a more narcissistic background, how many therapists might actually be narcissistic in our field? I don't know the answer to that question, but I thought it would be a helpful step in today's video for me to do an assessment of narcissism, because I think I kind of lean narcissistic. Okay, let's see if that's actually true. So the way we'll do this is I'm gonna do Dr. Craig Malkin's informal assessment for narcissism, and I'm gonna share the results with you. So I'm gonna just run through this assessment real quick, and I will let you know what the results are once I'm done. Okay, I'm back. That took me all of like not even 2 minutes to complete. And I thought it was gonna email me the results, but it just showed me the results right away. So, oh, okay. So it turns out that I'm pretty narcissistic. That's just, you can get the vibe here. I'll just put this on the screen and you can see what I'm looking at. So I'm scoring quite low at the extreme, it looks like, for egoism, and I'll just read out loud what the description says. Low scores tend to be relatively assertive, comfortable talking about themselves, and can tolerate, if not enjoy, attention and praise. Those are true statements about me. If you're low in egoism, just make sure you're not also high in extreme narcissism. Oh shoot, I already see that I am. I suppose it makes sense that I have a YouTube channel because I'm literally just talking to you and you can only talk back in the comments section, which is like much later and I can choose to not read it. So we're getting real here. All right, so stroking my apparently narcissistic ego, I'm also scoring high on healthy narcissism, which I appreciate is differentiated between the healthy and the extreme narcissism. So here, the assessment results say healthy narcissism means you're empathic, ambitious, caring, and confident. Yeah, those are true. As long as you're not high in extreme narcissism too, you're doing great. Okay, well I am, so let's keep reading. We're gonna get into the hard part. Okay. I scored really high on extreme narcissism. It's like in the red all the way, basically at the end. High scorers tend to be selfish, manipulative, demanding, and often arrogant. Oh no, I do not want to be those things. Tips: if you scored high on extreme narcissism, even in combination with high egoism, you need to work on opening up and sharing real vulnerability, sadness, fear, and loneliness. Now this is interesting because as an Enneagram 4 and a highly sensitive person, I am quite vocal about my emotions, my insecurities, sadness, fear, loneliness, arguably more than is helpful, honestly, which maybe circles back to the idea of like, I'm very comfortable talking about myself, which includes all of my feelings. Now I'm just going to constantly be evaluating my statements by saying, well, am I just being defensive because I'm narcissistic? And who knows, maybe I am. All right. Well, that leaves me at least a little undone. Apparently, I'm pretty narcissistic. Marie, 2 days later here. I am currently editing the video and I wanted to insert some additional thoughts here because after I filmed this video, I reached out to several of my closest therapist friends and asked about their thoughts on this topic, and some of them even took the self-assessment as well and scored similarly as I did, including high on the extreme narcissism scale. And they shared some thoughts with me in our consult meeting this morning, and I thought they'd be worth mentioning here. One is that this is a very brief assessment and it doesn't ask any questions specifically about being manipulative and selfish. It does ask questions about confidence and being able to persist through hardship and things like that. Also, that there is great value in being narcissistic at times, as long as it's not at the expense of other people. And one of the fellow therapists noted that sometimes we kind of go through the narcissism at some points in the day, and other times we are not so narcissistic, we're more insecure and things like that. And one other friend noted that the fact that I was willing to share my results was a sign that I'm not narcissistic. But I think, again, I don't think I meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. But I don't know. Maybe I'm pretty narcissistic, and that's okay. And maybe just need to be aware of the pitfalls. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in and name that here. Okay, bye, back to the video. Okay, so that was definitely a serving of humble pie for Marie. But my purpose in making this video was twofold. One, I wanted to shed light on the reality that narcissism can come in more nuanced formats than we kind of typically imagine it looks like. And on a more serious note, it is really important that we evaluate ourselves for the trait of narcissism to ensure that we are holding our clients' best interests at the highest level of priority. And that might mean that we have to work on ourselves a bit or a lot in order to make sure that we're humble enough to receive feedback from our clients and genuinely have empathy for them and their situation. And again, if you're interested in exploring this further, whether you're a therapist or not, it's super helpful. It's not designed specifically for therapists, it's for anybody. I've linked to the assessment below. And keep in mind, again, it is an informal assessment, so just take it with a grain of salt. And if you have any questions or concerns about your results, then definitely consult with a professional. That's a great opportunity to lean into your own personal therapy and, work on yourself a little bit to get to know what's going on a little better. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. Therapy Notes covers all of your practice management needs, and they have so many features I can't even reasonably name all of them right here at the end of this video. If you'd like to check out Therapy Notes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, thank you for joining me in this video. I hope you found it illuminating or helpful. I encourage you to do the self-assessment like I did, and if you feel like it, feel free to let me know your reactions in the comments below, or even what you scored on the self-assessment. That'll be really interesting to kind of see what's come up for other therapists who've done the assessment as well. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well. We are getting real. Gonna record my screen because I'm a narcissist.